I'm Henry. I'm one of the co-founders here at Reclaim. Thanks to everyone for joining. And this is kind of our first of what will be many webinars that we're going to be hosting here over the coming months and years. Today is going to be sort of a couple things. It's going to be sort of a broad overview of the platform. You know, for some folks, I see some names in here that I recognize from Intercom and the Reclaim community. So for some folks, this may be stuff that you're familiar with. And then for some folks who are newer to the platform, there may be, things that hopefully we can teach you about the platform that you didn't already know. And then we'll be kind of diving into the Google Calendar add-on and the planner, the new planner that we just released over the last couple of weeks. There's been a ton of improvements and changes to the product in that time frame. And so I want to make sure we spend a good deal of time on that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Awesome. Okay, cool. All right, we got this now. Reclaim, one of the things that we really were aiming to kind of go after when we first started working on Reclaim was really helping, individuals and teams and enterprises to be more intentional about how and where they spend their time. And, obviously a lot of that starts with the calendar, right? The calendar is this space that, it's filled with meetings, it's filled with, obligations that we have in our life and our work. But we believe it should also be filled with the stuff that you want to spend time on and that your teams want to spend time on. And so we've taken a really, I'd say, philosophically kind of a different approach to how we think about this problem, because we realized very early on in developing Reclaim that people want automation and they want sort of help and assistance in managing their calendar, but they don't necessarily want to fight with a robot, right? They want some flexibility. They want to be able to make changes to their priorities. They want to be able to kind of flex to commitments that they might have to other people or to meetings that get dropped in. And so a lot of that really manifests itself in how we built the platform. Probably the first feature, we have a few kind of really core components of the product. Tasks, habits, smart one-on-ones, and calendar sync are probably the big ones. And then of course, all of our integrations that feed into those features. But probably the first feature I'll talk about actually is habits. If you've gone through our onboarding, these are the habits that you have set up, kind of some time to catch up on email, some time to eat some lunch, kind of the important stuff that as busy professionals, we often don't get enough time to work on. And really habits are kind of like you can think of them as just like flexible routines for your week, right? The things you want to do regularly that you have some flexibility around, that you kind of can move around as your week changes, but that you really want to make sure you get some time for. And so if I dive into a habit, I'll just pick on lunch here for a second. You can see it's kind of basically a set of rules, right? You're telling Reclaim, look, I'm okay eating lunch anytime between 11 and 2 p.m. I don't really want to eat lunch for less than 25 minutes. I don't really need more than 50 minutes. And then kind of how often you want to do it. For most people, 5 times a week or 7 if you're including your weekends, seems about right. We've got some other options here. I won't spend too much time on them, but you can also kind of tell Reclaim more about kind of how you want the habit defended. And I'll talk about this here in a second. And you can also do some fun things like we actually auto-populate every word in many different languages for the word lunch, so that we'll actually avoid scheduling the habit if we see one of those words on your calendar. And you can do this for any habit that you create. But actually starting by just looking at Google Calendar, and I'll actually go to next week so we can get kind of a full view here. You can kind of see that we're doing some clever stuff here. We're kind of threading lunch throughout the week. We're threading email throughout the week. It's at different times on different days. On Tuesday, it's at 1 o'clock. On Thursday, it's at noon. On Wednesday, we actually have a team lunch. So Reclaim said, I'm just going to skip scheduling that thing today. But one of the first things that I think people don't always realize off the bat with Reclaim is that we're actually giving you even more sort of flexibility and availability than meets the eye, right? Blocking out time on your calendar is great, but if it leaves you in a position where people can't really find time to meet with you, or your team can't find time to meet with you, sometimes that can actually create even more problems for you. So for folks unfamiliar with this, you've probably seen these free emojis on your calendar before. You've probably seen these shield emojis. What those are is actually Reclaim looking at your availability, and we look at it in real time. Basically, every 15 seconds, we're reevaluating and resimulating your calendar. And we're trying to kind of figure out how much extra bandwidth do you have to do this thing today, And if the answer is, as the case is here with my mornings, right, I've actually got plenty of flexibility to catch up on my email if I want, we'll put the time down, but we'll actually mark it as free. And free events in Google are a really powerful tool because they signal that there's an event there, but they don't actually make your time unavailable to others. So if you use a service like Calendly for others to book time with you, or if folks inside of your organization use Google's Find a Time feature, for example, you can see that I actually have quite a bit more free time than meets the eye here. And so this is really powerful because it basically gives you the ability to kind of lay down your routines and lay down the stuff you need to get done. But the system is sort of giving you flexibility until we really see that you're running out of time. In the case of my lunch on Monday, we're seeing, look, there's not really much other opportunity here for you to eat lunch. So let's make sure you get at least 30 minutes and we'll mark the time as busy and make it public. So that's kind of a really powerful thing I'd mention right off the bat. Some of the things that you probably may have already seen with Reclaim, but I'll just kind of talk about them anyway. You block over these events. Let's say I decide I want to do something else at 9 o'clock. This habit's actually going to move here. We do this usually around every 15 seconds. Sometimes we're a little faster than Google is to actually update the calendar. But if we check the actual planner, you'll see that time actually got moved to another time. We now have morning catch up at 10 o'clock that day. Similarly, I can actually move these things around. If I decide I'm actually going to go catch up on my email at 6:30, again, to that point about flexibility, I can just move that event there, and Reclaim's not going to argue with me about it or try to move it back to 10 o'clock. It's going to actually let the time sit there. And if this were to get overbooked, we'd move it to the next best time that's closest to 6:30. So this is really a flexible system that you can work with the same way that you would with any other Google Calendar event. These are just a little bit smarter. So that kind of gives you a sense of maybe just how habits work, and really kind of more broadly how the Reclaim system kind of works from the perspective of just blocking time on your calendar. The next thing I'll talk about a little bit here is how we prioritize your routines and how we prioritize your time. So your habits actually get scheduled more or less in the order that they're stack ranked here, right? So we kind of have this concept of high priority habits. These are habits that you really want to make sure you get time for every week or every day. So lunch is a great example. For some folks, they absolutely want to make sure that they get time to catch up on email, or if they're in sales, do prospecting every day. And these are the things that Reclaim's really going to optimize to try to get time for first. Once we've found time for those things, the next things, this line, we call it the task line. The next thing it's going to try to find time for are your tasks. And I'll talk about tasks here in just a second. And then below that are basically what we call kind of low priority habits. And these are habits that, it's almost in the bucket of, if I have time for them, great. If not, I'm not gonna cry about it. I think it's a nice to have. And so that's kind of how you can think of it. And you can reprioritize these things on the fly. So 1 week, you've got a recruiting habit that's really high priority that you want to make sure you get time on. You can drag it to the very top of your list. And at the end of that week, you could drag it back down to the bottom of the list, or even deactivate it if you don't want to spend time on it anymore. And so really, you can kind of think of these as routines that you can kind of cycle and prioritize really however you want. And we want to give you a lot of control over those knobs and dials. I'll talk about tasks for a moment now, and I'll start by showing it to you inside of our product, and then I'll also start to show you kind of some of our integrations and how we integrate into other systems that you may be using today. Tasks are basically, I need to get this work done by a certain date, and I need this much time before that date. A lot of task systems out there will use the due date as the date that the time actually gets blocked. For example, Google Tasks, if you've ever used it without our integration, will just plop down a reminder on the day that the actual thing is due. In some cases, that's fine, but in many cases, especially if you need, a few hours or even 8 hours of time to work on something, it doesn't really do you much good to have that time blocked out on the day that it's due. And so our perspective is let's get you the time before it's due. So I'll create a task here. Let's call it our write up a strategy document. And let's say I need 4 hours here. You can pick whether you want it to schedule between your working or personal hours. I'll talk about that in a little bit here. These are basically time ranges that you can set where you want Reclaim to schedule certain types of tasks. I can specify kind of how I want the task broken up. So if I want it broken up into 30-minute chunks. In this case, it's a strategy doc. I probably want to make sure I, don't get any less than, 2 hours and probably not more than 4. And then what I'm giving Reclaim here is basically the earliest date that I want to start work on this task. And let's say in this case, I want to start the work on Monday. And it's due, let's just say it's due by Friday, the 17th at 2 p.m. I can add some notes to it if I want here. I can change the privacy of it, but I'm just going to go ahead and hit save. And in a moment here, you will actually see that this task got scheduled. And it actually got scheduled for Tuesday the 14th. And we're actually kind of looking at your calendar right now and kind of realizing like you may not necessarily have a ton of opportunities to work on this thing. So we've actually put this thing down on the calendar and marked it as busy. You can see I have some other tasks here that are marked as free because Reclaim's sort of looking at my schedule and realizing, you've actually got, a decent amount of bandwidth to work on this thing. Just like habits, you can reprioritize these things. By default, we will actually schedule your tasks in the order that they're stack ranked here. So if I'm like, this strategy document, it's actually much more important. I want to make sure that it gets scheduled sooner. And actually, I don't want to start it on Monday. I want to start it on, ASAP. I want to get this thing on my calendar as soon as possible. In a moment here, you'll actually see this thing will try to schedule even sooner. And so we give you a lot of control over kind of how those tasks get prioritized. The nice thing about Reclaim is that it also integrates with a whole bunch of other sources where your tasks might live, right? So we know that, it's, you've probably got your work being captured in all sorts of different platforms. In our case, we have integrations with Todoist, with Jira, with Asana, ClickUp, and Linear. I'll show you Linear since that's the platform we use internally for all of our kind of project management and engineering tasks. And a good example, and this is a very similar kind of metaphor to what you're going to see in all of the integrations that we build. Let's say I need to, look into customer bug and, blah, blah, blah. And I say it's, a high priority thing. I assign it to myself and I give it an estimate. In some platforms, these estimates are going to have hours. In Linear, they don't believe in hours. And so you give it sort of like a t-shirt size, which is what we use internally. And then I can give this actual thing a due date, or I can give it a cycle, which is basically like a sprint. And it's going to use that as its due date. So that's all you need basically for Reclaim to know that this is something it can schedule, right? Just a title, an assignee, an estimate, and a due date, right? And it's all the kind of information that we need to get it on the calendar. So once I hit save and add this Reclaim label, you can also have these things auto sync. We have a couple different modes for how these things sync to your calendar. In a moment here, you'll actually see that this will get synced to the calendar. And this is really powerful when you start thinking about, teams and capacity planning, right? We have so much kind of work that we're trying to do in any given sprint, and we have so much work that we're trying to do in any given cycle. And, oftentimes engineering teams won't necessarily think as much about time estimation, but our calendars are our calendars, right? We've got meetings, we've got things that are filling up our time. And so knowing kind of whether we actually have capacity to work on, the things that are assigned to us is really powerful for teams. If this thing, ends up being at risk, we put little like flaming emojis on here, which is kind of cute. And so there's going to be a lot more kind of work that we're doing on this over the coming months and years. But we basically just created a task for this thing in a matter of, seconds. And I could do this for any of those project management platforms or to-do list platforms that I mentioned. The task itself has kind of the ticket number. If I go into the actual description, there's actually a link to the task itself. And you can see it got scheduled for June 16th. So if I go check out the planner, I've got this, thing here that's scheduled sooner. I could send this thing to the very top if I want, right? And say like, actually, this is really important. I want to make sure it gets done sooner. And suddenly it's scheduled on my calendar at 3 p.m. Right? So a lot of flexibility over how you kind of manage this kind of work. I'll talk a little bit now before I go into smart one-on-ones, which I think is kind of a good way to think about using Reclaim to manage more than just your routines and your to-dos. I'll talk a little bit about kind of actions that you can take on your tasks and habits from our new planner interface, as well as from our Google Calendar add-on. The planner basically got a complete overhaul over the past few weeks. We basically, actually I should say the past few months we've been working on this. We released it over the last few weeks. We basically rebuilt the entire thing from the ground up. And we learned a lot from the original planner experience in terms of like how people wanted their tasks to be prioritized, what types of actions they needed access to. And we took a lot of that to heart and really tried to incorporate it into this new experience. So the first thing I'll point out is, Reclaim treats the past. You can kind of think of like things that happened in the past as a signal for what we're going to schedule in the future, right? So if I take this customer bug thing and drag it into the past, Reclaim says, okay, cool, looks like that work is actually done, right? And this is basically our way of, kind of keeping the train moving and making sure that we continue to schedule the stuff, as it's coming in. But if it turns out that I actually didn't do that work and I was like, I actually didn't complete this chunk of work that I thought was going to be done, I can just add time to it, get out another hour to it, or I could hit this reschedule button. And this is true of tasks as well, right? Of habits as well. You can delete events that are in the past or reschedule events that are in the past, and they'll just move it to the next best time in the future. As you can see, it's back on my calendar for 3 p.m. And so tasks kind of have this set of concepts around like states that they're in, right? So, open tasks are things that are still open and scheduling. They're either scheduling or done scheduling. These are the things that are actually scheduled and on my calendar. This is a list of tasks that would be done scheduling, meaning like Reclaim thinks they're done, but is kind of waiting for you to tell us one way or the other if they're done. I'll show you in a second. So you can see I have a done scheduling task here. Marked done is like, it's done because you told us it's done. You checked it off, and that's a signal to us that we no longer need to schedule any time for it. So you kind of have these core filters that you can use to really sort of understand the status of all of your tasks. If I go back to open here for a second, let's say I've got this competitive intel committee meeting, it's a 2-hour long meeting. I'm not really sure I'm going to participate a whole bunch. Maybe it's more of like a meeting where I'm going to actually respond to emails or something like that. I can just hit start, right? And start is a really powerful way if you're in the moment and you want to work on something really quickly, regardless of where the task is scheduled. You could just say start and it'll just get scheduled right there. If I change my mind, I actually get asked a question in the competitive intel committee, and now I need to, tune back in, I can hit stop, and we're just actually going to move that thing right back to where it was. If I, intend to start it, and I actually, didn't get to it in the, like, let's say 15 minutes go by and I don't get to it, I could restart it. So we give you sort of those basic controls to just like tell Reclaim when you're ready to start working on something. Similarly, if I want to say, hey, I actually got some work done on this thing, but I did it in off hours. I did it at like 11 p.m. Right? So maybe I actually already spent an hour on responding to emails. So I don't really need that time block anymore. I can just log an hour on it, and I could pick a specific time, or if I just want to be really fast about it, I can just log that work. And in a second here, you'll see this will actually change to done scheduling. Right? So there's a lot of controls over kind of giving feedback to the platform about kind of what state your tasks are in or what state you want them to be in. You can do the same thing for habits. You can start habits sooner or later. If I decide I want to skip something for the day, maybe I don't want to actually catch up on my email in the afternoon, I can skip that. We give you a lot of control over this stuff. And the overall experience is a lot faster, a lot more kind of simple and streamlined than I think it was originally. And then also importantly, we now have support for things like drag and drop, right? So if I decide I actually want to write that doc at 5, I can just write it at 5, right? If I decide I want to, move this guy to 3 p.m., I can move it to 3 p.m., right? So we give you a lot more control over just like how your Reclaim stuff is scheduled. We also give you some nifty little, this is some recent development. When you make changes, there's this interesting tension around automation versus flexibility. When you make changes to tasks and habits, we try to do our best to accommodate those changes. But in some cases, maybe your task starts scheduling in a way that you're not like a huge fan of, or you're a little nervous about kind of what it's doing. You can always just reset it. So if I say like, hey, I don't really like where my right proposal thing landed, I'm just going to reset it, and it's going to clear out all of those state changes. And in some cases, that may not actually move the task, but it kind of clears out the slate so that Reclaim can really, kind of do its thing again. So that's kind of our planner at a really high level. What I'll show you now is our Google Workspace integration. And in many ways, this Workspace integration is very similar to the planner by design. We tried to kind of give it as much of the same look and feel and actions as we could, even though we were building in Google's platform. You can install this for your own calendar today. It's completely free. If you're on our free plan or paid plan, doesn't matter. If you're a Workspace admin, I don't know if there's any Google Workspace admins on the phone, you will also see a admin install button, which means you can also install it for your entire Google Workspace, which is an awesome way to make sure that everyone gets the power of Reclaim inside of their calendar. But if I just go check out this Workspace integration, what we're really trying to give you are all those controls that I showed you for things like reschedule or log work or skip or start directly within Google Calendar, because we know that people like to work in different platforms throughout the day, and we're big believers in leaning into that instead of leaning away from it. So you'll see as you kind of click around different events, this is that linear ticket that I created. It's basically giving me kind of the title of the task, its current status, its done scheduling, what the duration was, and I get controls here. I can do things like, yep, this thing's actually completely done. And in a second here, it'll actually reflect that state. If I change my mind and actually, no, I need to start this thing now, I hit start. And in a moment here, you'll see this event will actually move to now. Unlike our planner, unfortunately, we don't have complete control over Google's Canvas. So sometimes you'll see little kind of waits. You can see we're telling you we're still updating the calendar here, but this event should update in just a second, and there it goes. I can log work, or I can add time to it. I can reschedule events, directly from here. And so, just to be clear, these were things you could already do, or at least many of them you could already do in Google Calendar just by dragging events around or extending them or deleting them. But this really gives you more kind of transparent, explicit controls over basically all the actions that we're giving you for your Reclaim managed events. If I want to, start a strategy document work, I can just hit start, and this thing will actually get started on my calendar. And you can see it actually replaced the thing that was originally scheduled there. You can create new tasks from here. The other really nice thing, if you're a calendar sync user, and I actually don't know if I have any calendar sync events in here. Ooh, wrong part of the demo. If you're a calendar sync user, we actually show you even more information. I can get a calendar sync running here in another environment and show it to you in a second. But if you're a calendar sync user and you click on a synced copy of an event, we'll show you all the details of that event, and we'll even give you controls to do things like join the meeting if it's got a video conference link on it. This really addresses, I'd say, a core thing that gets brought up a lot by people who use calendar sync, which is sometimes you don't want to see those duplicates. You don't want to see the original event and this kind of copy on your calendar. And so this lets you just view one event and one event only. And when you click that sync copy, you'll see all the source details on the right-hand side. So a lot of control from this calendar add-on. We're basically, kind of think of this as V1, and we're going to continue to make a whole bunch of improvements to it in the coming months. But we're really, really excited to get it out there because it fills a pretty critical, workflow gap, I think, in the product, and gives people a lot more control over the events when they're inside of Google Calendar. So maybe I'll actually pause here for just a second and just to kind of see if there's any questions at this point. I'm going to take a look at the Q&A here, and I will start answering those questions. So how can I keep tasks open if I didn't have the chance to come up with them? Look for a possibility to keep the task open that long until I manually commit that's been fulfilled, ideally raises the time and the urgency. So I think what this question is kind of getting at is a thing that comes up quite a bit, which is, basically a desire to have the Reclaim system keep your tasks basically open, like continuing to schedule until you actually mark them as done. This is a complicated problem because, as you can imagine, because we use the past as an indicator of what to schedule next, sometimes we don't, it's hard for us to kind of, know what to do next without taking that input. That being said, we are working on a setting that we're hoping to get to in the next, few weeks to probably a few months here, which will allow you to basically have like a cool down period where you could say, if I don't mark something is done in a matter of, let's say, a day, automatically reschedule it. Or if I don't mark something is done for a day, consider it done. And so we're going to probably have a solution to this problem in the future. But one of the ways that we wanted to at least start addressing it was by having the status in the planner where you can do things like take action on things that are done scheduled, right? But this is definitely a very, very common piece of feedback if I'm understanding the question correctly. So I think I answered it, but I answered it in non-text form, which Zoho doesn't seem to like. Cool, doesn't look like there's any other questions. Oh, there is. Oh, thanks a lot. You're welcome, Andre. So I don't think there's any other questions at this point. Probably the next thing I'll dive into, and then probably spend a bit of time on their Smart One-on-Ones. So I don't know how many folks.
I was just going to suggest maybe before you get into Smart One-on-Ones, because you can connect it back in on the Smart One-on-Ones, is just showing how you can reset the schedule exceptions from the add-on when you've made kind of you've snoozed the task off or you've moved a habit around. Might be helpful for folks to know about that capability.
Yeah, this is kind of similar to what we talked about in the planner, but yeah, basically, as you make changes to events, I'll move something over here. As you make changes to your tasks, we have this sort of automated system that's trying to find the best time automatically, but we also want to give you that flexibility where you can move events around. And in some cases, this basically creates, it can create scenarios where tasks and habits may not be scheduling the way you'd expect. And so both here and from the planner, you can actually reset these adjustments, right? And so I can say reset, and Reclaim is going to kind of make a best effort to get it back to kind of where it was before you made manual adjustments to it. And the same is true of habits, and actually for synced events, which unfortunately I have a great example of in front of me. You can do things like actually repair events that may not be syncing properly directly from this add-on. So, if you're, reaching out to Reclaim support every so often saying, hey, I'm not sure why this thing isn't syncing, we'll actually try to tell you a bit more information if something needs to be repaired and give you kind of a little button you can do that. So this is also like a space where you can kind of, not only give Reclaim feedback about how you want things scheduled, but even give the system direct feedback about like, hey, this thing just doesn't look quite right. Like, let me take an action and just kind of clear the slate. Yeah, good call out. So Smart One-on-Ones. So I'll kind of talk about Smart One-on-Ones, first through the lens of Google Calendar. We've got a few different ones set up here with Ellen, Kathy, and Nazem. Smart One-on-Ones are very similar to habits, but they're basically for you and another person, right? So I can do things like I'm doing with Ellen, where we meet for 25 minutes a week during our mutual meeting hours. Your meeting hours and all of your kind of working and personal hours get set here, so you can tell Reclaim when you want to do your work tasks, when you want to do your personal tasks, and then also when you want to have Smart One-on-Ones. In my case, I don't like having meetings on Wednesday, so I've got no meeting Wednesday here, and you'll see in a moment how we honor that. But the idea with kind of Smart One-on-Ones is it's not that important necessarily that Ellen and I meet every Thursday at 2 p.m. It's probably just more important that we meet every 7 days. And if stuff happens, I just want the system to kind of figure that out and kind of space things out as needed. So you can do a lot here. You can add a link to an agenda, obviously the invitee. You can customize the title. You've got different frequencies you can pick from. You can pick specific times. So if you know that like Ellen does not like meeting any other day except Mondays for whatever reason, you can pick that, or you can just say, anytime we're mutually available, give it an ideal time. This is like what we're going to try to hit as often as we can. Video conferencing, all the standard stuff. But it manifests itself on the calendar kind of like this. And you can see I've actually got all my one-on-ones batched up on Thursdays. But let's say, as I want to do, I go on vacation. Actually, really want to go to Hawaii, and I'm marking this as busy because I'm not doing anything except hanging out in Hawaii. So in a moment here, you're going to see not only my habits reschedule and any tasks that I have on that day reschedule. You're also going to see my Smart One-on-Ones reschedule, because Reclaim's not only looking at my availability, it's looking at my other attendees' availability, and it's basically going to figure out what's the next best time for us to meet. And if you'll recall, I don't like having meetings on Wednesdays. And so it moved all of our meetings to Tuesday. This meeting is actually what we call a dumb one-on-one. This is usually at some point in the demo, Patrick would pretend to be Lonnie and he'd send me a meeting invite. But in the interest of time, I'll leave this one here so you can see this is the sad one-on-one experience, and this is your one-on-ones with Reclaim experience. So all my one-on-ones got moved to Tuesday, and this is really powerful because when people plan vacations or work trips or conflicts, oftentimes we're planning like weeks and weeks in advance, and it's really easy in those moments to just like plop the time down, not really think about it, say, I'll worry about those meetings later. And then, you get back from vacation and you realize, holy smokes, like our calendars are totally booked like weeks and weeks out. And so this really kind of like lets the system get ahead of that for you without you having to kind of play, calendar Tetris across, a couple different people. Speaking of the calendar add-on, I can do things with my one-on-ones like reschedule them. We have these handy little links here, but if you have an add-on, you've got even more power. If there were a video conferencing link, I'd get that here as well. But let's say, I actually want to reschedule my meeting with Ellen. I want to do it for another day. And we'll see how this works with Ellen, given her meeting hours. And in a moment here, you'll see it probably pop back on the calendar. My guess is it'll probably pop in right around Monday, but we'll see about that. So you get a lot of the same controls that you get over your habits and your tasks. You can skip it for the week. Let's say, Kathy, sorry, I'm actually skipping it. We're not going to have our one-on-one, and it kind of tells me when my next meeting is going to be. So I can do all of this directly from Google Calendar, and I don't have to worry about popping back into Reclaim or popping into different places to do it. So that's like, again, really, really powerful part of using this experience. So that's Smart One-on-Ones. It's a great way to make sure that you kind of get the time that you need between you and another person. You can invite other people who work with you in the same domain. You can also do stuff, and this is really useful if you're like a salesperson who has accounts that you're trying to, or sort of champions that you're trying to stay in touch with regularly, or if you're a consultant or an investor, and you got all these people kind of outside your domains, and you want to make sure you have like a monthly or quarterly cadence or checkpoint with them. This is a really great way to do it, and there's really no platform out there. There is no platform out there that manages recurring meetings for people automatically outside of your domain. So there's a lot of really interesting use cases for Smart One-on-Ones that we've seen from our customers. The other thing is we'll automatically detect all the one-on-ones that are on your calendar. So in the case of that one-on-one that is not being managed by Reclaim, this one with me and Lonnie, who Patrick told me long ago is the inventor of the Nerf gun, fun story. I get kind of all the same information. We try to pull in what the current schedule is and try to match it as closely as we can. And you can just send an invite off right from here. So it's really easy to kind of bootstrap your existing one-on-ones. So that's kind of Smart One-on-Ones. And I'll pause here again for just a moment. It doesn't look like there's any other questions in here at the time. Probably the last couple things I'll show off, and then we'll kind of break for any remaining questions, is our calendar sync feature. This is one of those things that I think, if you've used Reclaim in any way, or if you're familiar with it at all, this is probably like one of the things that you know about our platform. We have a pretty sophisticated calendar sync capability. What is calendar sync? Well, there's this problem that exists if you use a platform like Google Calendar, where your colleagues can only see events from what we call, or what they call, your primary calendar, right? So this calendar here basically determines all of your availability. So when people use Google's Find a Time feature, or even if they use other types of booking platforms, they're only ever going to see availability on that calendar. What Calendar Sync does is it actually blocks events from other calendars that may be shared with that Google account. They may be in a completely different Google account. And not only does it block the time out on the other calendar, but we give you these really nice controls over privacy, right? So I can do things like say, well, this is actually a personal calendar, or I can say it's a work or travel calendar. I can pick a different color for it. But then I can also say things like, hey, I want these to show to other people as personal commitment, which is kind of an interesting way of communicating enough context, right? In the case here, we've got a thing called job interview. I probably don't want my colleagues to know that I have a job interview, But I also might not want them to think just busy, because sometimes busy can just like invite people to sort of book over it because they don't know what it is. Personal commitment, we found, has a really interesting way of communicating just enough context that it sort of pushes off people who might interrupt those events, but not so much context that they're going to know kind of what the personal commitment's about. If you're a fan of busy, you can make it busy. If you want to show all the details, to yourself, but make it private to others, or you want to show all the details to anyone with access to your calendar, you can do that as well. We give you some controls over things like all-day events and whether or not you want events to sync outside of your working hours. Maybe I'll actually.
And
See.
Henry, there's actually
Yeah,
one on the calendar now if you want to go back to the Google Calendar.
Thank you very much. Look at you.
For tomorrow, the 10th.
Lovely. So this is one that just came, thank you, Patrick, from our family calendar. This is family movie night. Thank you for the invite. And so you can see here, like, I have the actual full title of that event. There's a description. If there were more to the description here, like if Patrick put the name of the movie or something like that, I might actually get the information. It tells me which calendar it's coming from, and I can actually go open the event. I'm not sure if this will work because I don't think I have access to that calendar, but if I did, I'd be able to open it up. You can open up the settings for it. So we give you a lot of like information about synced events that we didn't before. The other really nice thing about this is that previously, if you wanted to see the original title of this event or the original description of this event, you'd have to share your that calendar with your Google account so that you could see the original event. With this, you don't really have to worry about that, because if you have the Google Calendar add-on, you can just like click this event and see the other details here. So calendar sync is really powerful. The very common case is the one that we're showing you here, a family calendar, a personal calendar. That's what we really built it for originally. Since then, we have met many, many, many people who have anywhere from half a dozen to many dozen clients that they work with, and they have dozens of different calendars that they need to keep in sync. And this is a platform where you can do that, right? You can set up, 20 different sync policies that will sync calendar A's availability to calendar B's availability and B to C and so on and so forth, right? So this is a really powerful use case, I'd say primarily for busy professionals who are just kind of looking to get their personal work and maybe a side gig blocked out. But even for like consultants and folks who kind of operate in consulting roles where they're kind of like taking on sort of a corporate identity at different companies or clients. This is a really, really powerful way to keep all those calendars in sync. Last thing I'll show you here, and then I'll kind of pause again for questions, is just kind of really kind of settings around how you kind of manage different types of things in Reclaim. So here we kind of give you controls over things like your task duration, different types of like defaults basically for when you create tasks, as well as visibility. The thing I'll really highlight here is buffer time and basically travel time and what we call decompression time. So by default, Reclaim will look for events with a location that are on your calendar, and will basically block time before and after those events. And so I don't know if I have a good example of it on the calendar, but hey, this is what the live demo is for. And so I'll say I'm going to drive to the beach, and the location is Beach Elementary School. That's the beach I'm in. And so I drop down this thing here, and in a moment, Reclaim's going to pick up this location, which is on North Humboldt in Portland, and we'll add actually 30 minutes before and after there for me to travel. The other nifty thing is if we pick up that it's a flight, which we have logic to do, we'll actually add 2 hours beforehand to get to the airport and an hour afterwards to get through, luggage and taxi and all that stuff. So you can see here, I've got my travel event now. Decompression time, this is something we're going to be making a whole bunch of changes and improvements to soon to give you even more flexibility over how these breaks manifest themselves. But basically, we block time after video conferencing meetings. We built this feature, as you can probably guess, during the heat of COVID and when remote work was basically the only way to work. And now that people are kind of getting back to the office, there's more of a desire to see some breaks between other kinds of meetings. But basically, this is just kind of our ability to add little kind of bio breaks or sort of take a breather breaks in between your video conference meetings, so that you're not sitting on back-to-back meetings every single day. Last thing I'll show you, if you've never used it before, our color coding feature is really powerful. In the future, we're going to give you more control over these categories, but by default, we'll auto categorize a whole bunch of work on your calendar. So your team meetings, your solo work. We actually use these categories. I'll actually pull it up here in a second for our Slack integration. Our Slack integration does a whole bunch of cool stuff, gives you a whole bunch of access to a lot of the same actions that I mentioned earlier. But another thing that it does is it actually will sync your calendar status, right, whether you're in an event or not, to your Slack status, and it will give you controls for different types of events. So if, say, you want to be on Do Not Disturb for your team meetings and your external meetings with customers, but you're okay being interrupted for solo work, you can kind of make those trade-offs, and you can set different status messages and things like that. But the really cool thing is that this color coding actually will apply to all of your events as well. So at a glance, I can tell, like, man, I've got a lot of meetings this week, right? I've got a lot of yellow. I kind of see my breaks a little bit more clearly. And this is just like a nice practice that I think people are today kind of doing manually, where they're trying to go in and keep their calendar color coded, but it's challenging to do, manually, right? Just by clicking events and changing the color of them. So this is really just a nice way to get some automation out of your experience. I think that's basically everything I wanted to cover today. As I mentioned, definitely install the Google Workspace add-on. It's a really, really powerful way to get more out of Reclaim directly within Google Calendar. Definitely check the planner out, check our integrations out. Those are all really powerful tools that you can use to kind of manage your work week and get more out of, both for you and your teams, a lot more out of the time you spend.
Henry, we got one question about Smart One-on-Ones. Basically just asking for repeating how they could be used outside of your domain.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, with Smart One-on-Ones, I can invite people with any email, right? And so when people get this invitation, they get basically prompted to sign up for Reclaim. They go through a really lightweight process of basically setting their meeting hours and setting the sort of like the boundaries of when they want to be able to meet. We also pick up things like their time zone and their availability, so that we make sure we can actually keep the meeting booked. It takes them a matter of probably seconds to get through that process. And then once they've done it, they have a recurring meeting with you. So if I wanted to invite, like, Patrick at lightbody.com to a one-on-one meeting, even though he's not in the same domain as me, we can just do that, right? And so that's like, one of the things that I think platforms like Calendly are really powerful at doing is like scheduling one-off meetings where you can send people scheduling links. And that's something, by the way, that's on our roadmap and something that we're planning to introduce in the future. One thing that you can't really do with platforms like that is set up recurring meetings, because in order to kind of run a recurring meeting automatically, you have to know the availability of both parties. And if someone's outside of your domain, there's really no way to do that without asking for a little bit of access. And so that's basically our approach. Is you can invite anyone to a Smart One-on-One on any cadence, and once you create this, you can actually get a link that you can also share with them as well, but this will also send them an email. Hopefully that answers your question. Cool. So if there's no other questions, maybe I'll wait a couple more seconds, but otherwise, thank you so much for attending this webinar. As I said, we'll be doing more of them in the future. I believe we do them every 2 weeks, I want to say. If Christy were here, she would remind me. I think we do them twice a month at this point. We have ones in the morning Pacific time, and then ones in the afternoon Pacific time. So we'll have more and more to come, and lots more features that we'll be demoing. Probably occasionally we'll do kind of deep dives on particular topics. So certainly if you have feedback or thoughts about things you'd like to see in the future, or you think other users might like to see in the future, let us know. This is going to be a really fun process of being able to talk to our community on a regular basis and kind of showcase what we're up to at Reclaim. So thank you so much for your time, and have a great evening, morning, afternoon, or day. Take care.